By the time Sabine Kells reached the mountain village of Briar Glen, the rain had soaked through her worn green coat, the mud had swallowed the shine of her boots, and 3 strangers had already laughed at the sight of her. She was a large woman with a round face, powerful arms, and dark eyes made tired by too many nights beside sickbeds. The innkeeper looked her up and down and said there was no room for someone who would take up half his hallway. A woman near the stove whispered that Sabine looked strong enough to pull a wagon, but too slow to climb a mountain. Sabine heard every word. She always did. She had come asking for honest work, not kindness, because kindness had become too expensive to expect. Before sunset, the same people who mocked her would send her above the tree line to care for the most feared man in the valley. Before winter ended, they would learn that the woman they called a burden was the only person strong enough to uncover what their respected leaders had buried in the snow. Sabine stood just inside the Briar Glen meeting hall, while water gathered beneath the hem of her coat. The building smelled of wet wool, lamp oil, and pine smoke. Men in muddy boots sat at long tables, drinking coffee after the late harvest. Women sorted jars for the winter pantry. Their conversations faded one by one as they noticed her. She was used to rooms becoming quiet when she entered. Silence could be sharper than laughter, because it gave people time to study every part of her they had already decided to dislike. "Sabine Kells," said Orson Vale from the raised platform at the far end of the hall. He was the village reeve, a broad, silver-haired man with a neat beard and the calm voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I did not know you were returning." "Neither did I until 4 days ago," Sabine answered. Her voice was low and steady, though her fingers were cold inside her gloves. "The clinic in Fair Hollow closed. I was told there might be work here." A thin woman named Berta Pell gave a little laugh. "Work doing what? Sitting on the roof so the wind cannot carry it away?" Several people chuckled. Sabine turned her tired eyes toward Berta. Once Sabine had spent 2 nights caring for Berta's feverish son. She had cooled his skin with damp cloths and counted every breath until the fever broke. Berta had thanked her then. Gratitude, Sabine had learned, was often the first thing fear erased. Orson raised a hand, and the room quieted. "There may be a position," he said. "It is temporary and difficult." "Those are usually the ones left for me," Sabine replied. A few people shifted in their seats. Orson's smile remained smooth, but his eyes hardened. Beside him stood Alden Pike, the village surveyor, a narrow man with a pointed nose and ink-stained fingers. On Orson's other side was Dr. Harlan Voss, who had taken over the small clinic after Sabine left. Harlan would not meet her gaze. "Ivo Mercer was injured 3 days ago," Orson said. "He fell near the North Ridge. His shoulder is damaged, and his leg is badly cut. He refuses to come down. Dr. Voss treated him, but Mercer needs someone in the house until he can move safely." At the name, the room changed again. A spoon stopped against a cup. Someone murmured a prayer. Children had been warned for years not to wander near Ivo Mercer's land. The villagers called him the wolf above the trees, though no one could explain what he had done, besides grieve alone and speak rarely. "How long?" Sabine asked. 2 weeks, Orson said. "Perhaps 3. Food and a small wage will be provided, if he allows you through the door." Berta smiled into her cup. "He will take one look and think the whole village sent him a winter ox." This time, the laughter came louder. Sabine felt heat climb into her face. She could have reminded them how many of their children she had delivered, how many infected wounds she had cleaned, and how many frightened old people had held her hand during their final nights. She could have told them that her body had never stopped her from carrying medicine through snow, or lifting an injured miner from a collapsed shed. Instead, she loosened her wet gloves and laid them carefully on the table. "I will go," she said, "but I want half the wage before I leave, and I want it written down." Orson's brows rose. "You think we would cheat you?" Sabine looked around the hall. "I think memory becomes weak when money is involved." The room went still enough for her to hear rain ticking against the windows. 6 years earlier, these same villagers had praised her hands. Then young Elian Pike, Alden's nephew, had died after a logging accident. His ribs had been crushed before anyone brought him to Sabine. She had worked until dawn, but she could not repair what the falling tree had done. Alden had needed someone to blame, and Orson had found it useful to support him. By the following week, people said Sabine was careless. By the end of the month, they said her size made her slow. No hearing had been held. No doctor had examined her work. The clinic door had simply been locked, and Sabine had left with one bag and a grief that was not hers to carry. Orson finally nodded. Alden will write the agreement. No, Sabine said. Dr. Voss will write it, and everyone here will watch him sign. Harlan's hand trembled when he reached for the paper. Sabine noticed. She noticed many things people mistook for nothing. At first light, a stable boy drove her north in a narrow cart. His name was Thomas Reed, and unlike the adults, he did not stare at Sabine's body. He stared at the mountain. The road climbed through dense fir trees and crossed streams swollen by autumn rain. Above them, stone peaks disappeared into a ceiling of grey cloud. Mr. Mercer does not like visitors, Thomas said. Last spring, Mr. Pike tried to measure his lower field. Mr. Mercer fired a shot into a tree. Did he aim at Mr. Pike? No, ma'am. He said the tree listened better. Sabine almost smiled. That sounds reasonable. Thomas glanced at her, surprised, then laughed. It was the first laugh she had heard in Briar Glen that did not leave a bruise. The cart could go no farther after the old stone bridge. Sabine tied her bag across her back and took the basket of food in both hands. Thomas offered to carry it, but he was 14 and half her weight. She thanked him and began walking. The forbidden trail rose sharply through wet rock and low brush. Cold mist settled on her cheeks. Each breath burned, and each step pulled at her knees. But she kept a patient pace. She had long ago learned that strength did not always look like speed. The trees became shorter as she climbed. Beyond them stood a dark stone house pressed against the mountainside. Its roof was steep, its chimney leaned slightly east, and shutters covered all but one window. A split-rail fence surrounded a small stable and a garden gone wild. There was no smoke from the chimney. Sabine knocked. Nothing moved inside. She knocked again and called Ivo's name. At last, a bolt scraped. The door opened no wider than the length of a hand, and one pale grey eye studied her through the gap. "Vale sent you," a rough voice said. "The village did. Same disease. Maybe, but I brought clean bandages and coffee." The eye narrowed. "Who are you?" "Sabine Kells. Nurse when people permit it, burden when they do not." For a moment, neither spoke. Then the door opened. Ivo Mercer was taller than she expected, though pain had bent him. His dark hair was threaded with grey and hung to his collar. A week of beard shadow covered a thin, weathered face. His left arm was tied badly against his chest, and one trouser leg was dark with old blood. He held a rifle in his good hand, but the barrel pointed at the floor. "You climbed here alone?" he asked. "Unless the basket learned to walk behind me." His mouth almost changed shape. "You should go back. You can tell me that after I look at your leg." I did not ask for help. Neither did the infection. He stared at her for a long time. Sabine did not lower her eyes. Finally, Ivo stepped aside. The house was colder than the air outside. Dust covered the shelves, and dry herbs hung in forgotten bundles from ceiling beams. A long table occupied the center of the main room. Maps, measuring tools, and loose pages covered most of it. On the stone fireplace stood a small portrait of a young woman with bright eyes and wind-blown hair. "Your wife?" Sabine asked before she could stop herself. Ivo set the rifle against the wall. "Do not ask about her. Then I will ask about your leg. Sit down." He obeyed with the bitter look of a man surprised by his own obedience. Sabine cut away the dirty cloth around the wound. The gash ran along the outside of his calf and had been closed with rough stitches. The skin was hot and red. "Dr. Voss did this?" she asked. "He said it was clean." "Dr. Voss says many things." Ivo watched her wash the wound. "You know him." "I used to know everyone below this mountain." She boiled water, cleaned the injury, and replaced 2 stitches that had torn. Ivo did not make a sound, but sweat shone at his temples. When she examined his shoulder, she found it swollen but not broken. She fixed the sling and wrapped it close to his body. "You have a fever," she said. "You need broth, sleep, and less pride." "I am out of broth." Then we have found the easiest problem. By evening, a pot simmered over the fire. Sabine had swept the main room, aired the blankets, and found enough potatoes and dried venison for several meals. Ivo sat near the table with a cup between his hands. He said little. She did not force conversation. Silence had been used against her often, but here it felt different. It was not a crowd waiting for her to fail. It was 2 tired people listening to rain on a roof. When darkness settled, Sabine noticed a small point of yellow light moving far across the slope. It appeared between the trees, vanished, then appeared again higher on the forbidden north trail. "Someone is out there," she said. Ivo turned too quickly and winced. The light disappeared. "Hunters," he said. "In this weather, men hunt many things." His voice had changed. Sabine looked at the maps on the table. One showed the North Ridge in careful blue ink, with a narrow line leading to a circle marked Mercy Spring. Before she could ask, Ivo folded the map and pushed it beneath a book. That night, Sabine slept in a small room beside the kitchen. Wind pressed against the walls like a searching hand. Near midnight, she woke to the sound of a floorboard. She sat up and listened. Another soft creak came from the main room. Sabine took the iron poker from beside the cold stove and opened her door. Moonlight spilled through the uncovered window. No one stood inside. The front latch remained closed. Yet the maps on the table had shifted. One page lay on the floor, and the north window was open by an inch. Sabine crossed the room and pulled it shut. Outside, something moved near the fence. It could have been a deer. It could have been a man. In the morning, Ivo dismissed it. "The frame is loose. Windows do not sort papers. You talk too much before coffee, and you lie poorly before breakfast." He gave her a hard look, but some life had returned to his face. His fever was lower. Sabine helped him stand, and he managed 6 slow steps before the pain forced him back into the chair. For the next 3 days, their routine settled around the weather. Sabine changed his bandages, cooked simple meals, and watched the cloud line for signs of snow. Ivo taught her where he kept lamp oil and dried beans. He protested whenever she carried wood, though his injured arm made him useless with the axe. "I can lift a log," Sabine told him after he tried to take one from her. "The village has spent years telling me I am built like an ox." It would be rude not to enjoy the advantage. Ivo's expression darkened. "Who says that? People with weak imaginations. Give me names. What will you do? Limp down the mountain and glare at them? I have frightened men from a chair before." Sabine laughed, a real laugh that surprised them both. It filled the cold room and seemed to wake the walls. Ivo looked at her as if he had forgotten such a sound could exist in his house. On the 4th evening, snow began falling in soft, uncertain flakes. Ivo sat near the fire while Sabine mended the torn shoulder of his work shirt. The portrait on the mantel caught the light. "Her name was Mara," he said. Sabine kept her eyes on the needle. "You told me not to ask. You are not asking." She waited. "She knew every trail on this mountain," he continued. "She could find water in stone. She drew most of those maps. 5 years ago, she went to Mercy Spring and did not return." Sabine's needle stopped. What happened? They said she slipped from Eagle Cut. Alden found her scarf near the ledge. Orson organized the search. Harlan signed the paper. Did they find her? Ivo stared into the flames. 2 days later, in the river below, the fall had taken her life. The words were plain, but the space after them carried everything he had not said. "You do not believe she slipped," Sabine said. "Mara crossed Eagle Cut in winter before breakfast. She would not have slipped on a dry autumn morning. What was she doing at the spring? Trying to prove the village did not own it." He rose too fast, pain twisting his face, and crossed to the table. From beneath the maps, He pulled an old leather notebook. Mara's writing filled the pages in neat slanted lines. She had recorded the flow of Mercy Spring through each season. The water crossed Ivo's land before feeding 3 lower farms. A railroad company had once offered a fortune for control of it, but the sale required proof that the village council owned the upper source. Mara found an older land grant, Ivo said. It showed the spring belonged equally to the families who settled the lower valley. Orson said she was mistaken. A week later, she died. The grant vanished. Sabine touched the edge of the notebook. Why did no one investigate? Because Orson held the hearing. Alden presented the map. Harlan described the injuries. Every clean hand in Briar Glen washed the others. Outside, the wind rose. Snow struck the window in dry little bursts. "And your accident?" Sabine asked. Ivo looked toward the door. "My saddle strap was cut nearly through. It broke above the north ravine. Did anyone know you were riding there? Alden asked me about the trail the day before." Sabine thought of Harlan's shaking hand as he signed her work agreement. She thought of the lantern beyond the trees and the open window. "They did not send me here to help you." Ivo's grey eyes met hers. "No. The storm arrived before dawn. It did not descend gently. It struck the house with a roar that shook soot from the chimney and drove snow beneath the door. The world beyond the windows vanished." Sabine woke to Ivo calling Mara's name. She found him on the floor beside his bed, burning with fever. His bandage was soaked, and angry red lines climbed from the wound toward his knee. The infection had deepened. "Ivo, look at me!" She touched his face. "Can you hear me?" His eyes opened, but he saw someone else. "The lantern," he whispered. "Mara, wait." Sabine's fear sharpened into purpose. She had seen this before. If the infection spread farther, the mountain would claim him before the road opened. She needed stronger medicine. Ivo had mentioned an old supply chest in the stable, left from the days when Mara guided travelers. Sabine wrapped herself in blankets beneath her coat and tied a rope around her waist. She fastened the other end to the kitchen post. When she opened the door, the wind nearly tore it from her hands. Snow struck her face so hard it felt like sand. The stable stood only 40 steps away, but the storm erased it. She followed the rope into the white. Twice she fell to her knees. Once the wind turned her sideways, but her weight held her against the earth. She moved hand over hand until her fingers found the stable latch. Inside, a frightened mule kicked at its stall. Sabine spoke softly until it calmed. She found the supply chest beneath a saddle blanket. Most of the bottles were empty, but one sealed packet of willow bark powder remained, along with clean spirits, needles, and heavy thread. Back in the house, she worked for hours. She opened the infected stitches, cleaned the wound, and let it drain. Ivo cried out once and gripped her wrist with enough force to leave marks, but she did not pull away. She cooled his skin with snowmelt, fed him small sips of bitter tea, and kept the fire alive with wood stacked near the hearth. By afternoon, the storm had sealed every window in white. Sabine's own body ached. Her wet hair clung to her face, and smoke stung her eyes. Still, she stayed beside him. "Do not leave," Ivo murmured. "I am not leaving. Everyone leaves. Not tonight." His hand loosened around hers. "I could not find her. I know. I heard her calling in the river for years." His voice broke. "Every spring when the ice moved, I heard her. I should have gone with her that morning." Sabine leaned closer. "You did not cause what happened. You do not know that. I know guilt. It lies in the voice the same way fever lies in the skin. You loved her. That is not the same as failing her." The hard mountain man turned his face toward her hand and began to weep. There was no anger in it, no pride left to protect him. His grief came quietly at first, then with deep, broken breaths that shook his whole body. Sabine held his head against her chest and let him cry. She did not tell him to be strong. She had always hated when people said that to the suffering. Strength was not silence. Sometimes strength was trusting another person enough to fall apart. Near midnight, his fever finally began to ease. Sabine remained awake until morning, counting his breaths. When pale light touched the snow-packed windows, Ivo opened his eyes and saw her. "You stayed," he said. "I promised. You carried me back to bed, dragged you with great dignity." He glanced at the bruises forming on her wrist. "I hurt you. You were fighting a fever. You crossed the yard in that storm. I needed supplies." Ivo studied her face with an expression she could not name. "They called you a burden." Sabine looked away. "People say what makes them feel tall. They are fools." The gentleness in his voice reached a place in her that insult could not. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. "Do not," she whispered. "Do not what? Be kind because I saved you. Gratitude fades. I know what follows." Ivo pushed himself higher against the pillow. "Tell me." For years, Sabine had carried the story of Elian Pike as if it were a stone tied inside her. That morning, while snow buried the world and the fire settled into red coals, she told Ivo everything. She told him how Elian had arrived barely breathing. She told him how Alden screamed that she was moving too slowly, though no one else knew what to do. She told him how Orson visited the next day and praised her effort, then stood silent when the accusations began. She told him how Harlan knew the injury could not have been treated, yet signed a statement saying delay might have mattered. "I was 28, she said. "I thought if I explained carefully enough, truth would win." But they did not need truth. They needed somewhere to put their pain. I was large, unmarried, and alone. I was easy to point at. "Why did you come back?" "Because Fair Hollow closed. My savings were gone, and pride does not buy bread." She gave a tired smile. I told myself I did not care what they thought. That was not true. Every time someone laughs, part of me becomes that young woman again, standing outside the clinic while they changed the lock. Ivo reached for her hand. His fingers were weak but warm. "When I look at you, I do not see what they see." Sabine tried to pull away, but he held on. "What do you see?" she asked. "The strongest person who has ever entered this house." The storm lasted 2 days. When it passed, the mountains shone beneath a hard blue sky. Snow covered the yard to Sabine's waist, but the house felt warmer than it had before. Ivo's fever was gone. His wound began to close cleanly. They ate breakfast at the long table, and for the first time, he asked whether she would stay after the 3 weeks ended. Sabine stirred honey into her tea. "As your nurse, as yourself." Before she could answer, someone knocked. Tomas stood outside with a pack horse and fear in his eyes. Orson had sent food, along with a message asking whether Ivo could sign a boundary notice. Alden needed the paper before the winter council meeting. "He sent me because nobody else would come," Tomas said. "But Mr. Vale told me not to enter the map room." Ivo's gaze moved toward the table. "I do not have a map room." Thomas swallowed. "That is what he said." Sabine brought the boy inside and gave him hot soup. While Ivo opened the supply pack, she found a folded note hidden beneath a sack of flour. It had no signature. The message was made from words cut out of an old newspaper. "Leave the mountain before it keeps you too." Ivo read it twice. His face became still. "Mara received one like this," he said. 3 days before she died." Tomas went pale. "I did not put that there." "We know," Sabine told him. Ivo crossed to the table and began sorting the maps. His movements grew faster. "The Mercy Spring survey is gone." Sabine remembered the night window. "Which one?" "Blue border. Mara marked the old family boundaries on it." He searched every pile, then opened drawers. 2 pages are missing from her notebook too. What was on them? Names. She interviewed the older families about the spring. Sabine examined the note. One cut word, mountain, had a faint blue line across the paper. This came from a printed notice. Tomas leaned closer. "Mr. Pike uses blue guidelines when he sets type at the council press. He says it keeps the words straight." Sabine and Ivo exchanged a look. "You should go home before dark," Ivo told the boy. "Say nothing about the note." After Tomas left, Sabine locked every window. Alden stole the map, or someone working for him. If the map proved their claim, they would show it publicly. They stole it because it proved the opposite. Ivo nodded. Mara made copies of everything. She never trusted one page to survive. They searched the house for the rest of the day. They opened trunks, checked behind drawers, and lifted loose floorboards. Snowlight faded into evening. Sabine was about to give up when she noticed tiny scratches along the portrait frame on the mantel. She removed the picture of Mara and found a narrow piece of paper tucked between the wooden backing and the glass. It was not the land grant. It was a letter in Mara's hand. "Ivo, if you are reading this, then I was right to be afraid. Orson and Alden have offered Harlan a share of the spring money. They plan to declare the lower farms abandoned after the winter families leave. The old grant is safe where mercy falls without touching earth. Trust Lena Dorr. She remembers the first boundary stone." Ivo sat heavily in the nearest chair. She knew. Sabine read the last line again. "Where mercy falls without touching earth. The spring drops over a shelf before reaching the ground. There is a cave behind it. Then that is where she hid the grant." Ivo looked toward the window. "The trail is buried, and someone is using it at night." For the next week, they waited and prepared. Ivo regained strength slowly. Sabine insisted he rest, and he complained with growing energy, which she took as a good sign. In the evenings, they studied Mara's remaining notes. Lena Dorr had once owned a lower farm with her husband. After Mara's death, a revised survey moved the boundary through their barn. Orson claimed they owed years of water fees. The Dorrs lost their land and moved into a cottage behind the mill. 2 other families suffered the same fate. "They did not sell the spring," Sabine said. "They have been gathering the land around it first." "A company will pay more if no families can challenge the title," Ivo replied. "Then we need the grant, witnesses, and proof they caused your fall." He glanced at her. "You say that as if we are preparing a grocery list. Fear becomes smaller when given useful work." One clear night, the lantern returned. It moved along the ridge just after moonrise. This time, Sabine and Ivo were ready. Ivo carried a walking stick and a small shuttered lamp. Sabine wore 2 wool skirts beneath her green coat and carried rope, bandages, and Mara's letter. "You should remain here," Ivo whispered as they crossed the fence. "You should still be in bed. It appears neither of us is sensible." They followed the light at a distance. The trail climbed between black stones and wind-twisted pine. Snow softened their footsteps. Sabine breathed hard but kept moving. Ivo did not hurry her. When the path narrowed, he offered his good hand without comment. She took it. The lantern stopped near a rock shelf. Voices drifted through the trees. "The map is useless without the marker," a man said. Sabine recognized Alden Pike. Another voice answered, lower and nervous. "Dr. Harlan Voss. Orson said Mercer would die from the fall. If that nurse had not climbed up here, she will leave. People like her always leave when the town turns on them." Ivo stiffened. Sabine placed a hand on his chest before he could step forward. Through the branches, they saw Alden and Harlan beside a small fire. A blue-bordered map lay open across a crate. Alden held a brass survey marker. "You cut the strap," Harlan said. "You deal with Mercer, and you gave him weak medicine. We both did our part." Sabine felt Ivo's breath change beneath her palm. His anger was almost a living thing. She leaned close to his ear. "Not here. Their word against ours will not be enough." Ivo's jaw tightened, but he nodded. They watched Alden place the map and marker inside a tin box. He hid it beneath a flat stone near a split pine. Then the 2 men took the lantern and descended toward the village. When they were gone, Sabine and Ivo recovered the box. The map showed new boundaries drawn in red over Mara's blue lines. Notes in Alden's hand listed payments from something called North Crest Water and Rail. Harlan's initials appeared beside 2 amounts. Folded beneath it was a work order for replacement saddle leather, dated the day after Ivo's accident. The order described the old strap as cut during testing. "They kept records," Sabine whispered. "Greedy men believe paper makes theft respectable." They carried the box home. At dawn, Ivo asked Sabine to rest, but she sat at the table making copies. If the originals disappeared, the truth would not disappear with them. "Mara did that," he said. "She was wise. You would have liked each other." Sabine looked at him carefully. There was sadness in his face, but no wall. I think I would have. The next day, they went to find Lena Dorr. Ivo had not entered Briar Glen in nearly 2 years. When villagers saw him walking beside Sabine, conversations stopped. His limp was visible, but so was the way his hand hovered near her elbow when the road turned slick. Lena lived in a one-room cottage behind the mill. She was 76, small and bent, with bright brown eyes. At the sight of Mara's letter, she covered her mouth. I told her where the first stone stood, Lena said. My father showed it to me when I was a child. It was carved with 3 river lines. Alden pulled it from the ground after Mara died. He said it had no legal value. Would you say that at a public hearing? Sabine asked. Lena's fear was immediate. Orson owns this cottage. That is how he keeps everyone quiet, Ivo said. Sabine knelt beside Lena's chair. I cannot promise you there will be no cost. I have learned not to make promises like that. But if no one speaks, he will take the spring, and this fear will become the only thing your grandchildren inherit. Lena studied Sabine's face. They drove you out once. Yes, and you came back. I came back hungry. I stayed because I finally found something worth standing beside. Lena placed her hand over Sabine's. Then I will stand too. They found other witnesses quietly. Jonah Creel, a former clerk, had copied payment totals before Orson dismissed him. Maybelle remembered seeing Alden near Ivo's stable the morning of the accident. Thomas had delivered sealed envelopes between Orson and Harlan without knowing their contents. Each person carried a small piece of the truth and a large fear of speaking it. The Winter Council hearing was set for the following Saturday. Orson had planned to approve the final spring survey in a routine vote. Sabine submitted a written challenge under the old county rules. He could not legally refuse a public hearing. That was when the village turned on her again. Not everyone joined in, but enough did. A drawing appeared on the meeting hall door showing Sabine as a huge bear sitting on the mountain. Someone wrote that Ivo had lost his mind and hired a wife by the pound. At the market, Berta Pell stood beside a sack of potatoes and asked whether Sabine intended to eat the winter stores before the hearing. Sabine kept walking, but the words followed. They reached into old wounds with familiar fingers. That evening, she returned to Ivo's house and removed her wet coat without speaking. Ivo saw her face. What happened? Nothing new. Tell me. They laughed. Berta said the meeting hall would need stronger floorboards if I planned to stand before the council. Sabine busied herself with the kettle. It is a simple insult. I have heard worse. Simple things can still cut. She set the kettle down too hard. I know what I look like, Ivo. I know how much room I take. Every doorway, every chair, every narrow path reminds me before anyone opens a mouth. I do not need protection from facts. Your body is not an accusation. Sabine turned away. You can say that here. Down there, they see a joke. If we lose, that is all I will be again. Ivo came closer. He still moved carefully, but his strength was returning. Look at me. She did. When I was dying on that floor, your arms lifted me. When the storm buried this house, your weight held you against the wind. When anger nearly made me reveal everything in the trees, your hand stopped me. They insult the very things that keep defeating them. Her breath caught. Let them laugh, he said softly. Every cruel word tells us where their fear lives. Sabine wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. That almost sounded wise. Do not repeat it. I have a reputation. She laughed through the tears, and he smiled. It was the first full smile she had seen on his face. It changed him. For a moment, he looked like a man who had once expected joy. Ivo raised one hand and touched her cheek. His palm was rough and warm. Sabine went still. May I? He asked. No one had ever asked her with such care. She nodded. He kissed her slowly. There was no hunger to prove, no pity to repay. It was a quiet promise made beside a steaming kettle, while winter pressed against the glass. Sabine had imagined that if anyone ever kissed her, she would wonder whether he felt the softness beneath her coat and regretted it. Instead, She felt Ivo's hand settle gently at her waist, steady and certain. For once, she did not make herself smaller. On the morning of the hearing, snow began again. The meeting hall filled before noon. Farmers crowded the benches. Mill workers stood near the walls. Orson sat behind the council table with Alden and Harlan beside him. Their clothes were neat, their hair carefully combed, and their expressions calm enough to suggest that truth was something they owned. Sabine entered wearing her worn green coat. Ivo walked beside her. A murmur moved through the room. Berta called from the back. "Careful, Mercer. If she sits on your evidence, we will never see it." Laughter broke out. Orson did not stop it. He leaned back and watched Sabine, expecting her to lower her head. She did not. Sabine removed her coat and folded it over one powerful arm. Then she turned to face the room. "You have made my body the subject of this village for years," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. "You blamed it when I could not save a boy whose injuries no nurse could repair. You mocked it when I climbed through a storm to save a man your doctor expected to die. You think shame will make me leave before I speak. It will not, so laugh now if you need to. When you are finished, we will discuss the stolen land." No one laughed. Orson struck the table with a small wooden hammer. "This hearing concerns a boundary survey, not personal grievances." "Good," Sabine said. "Then we agree." She laid Mara's letter on the evidence table, followed by the blue-bordered map, the payment notes, and the saddle order. Alden's face lost its color. "Those documents were stolen," he said. Ivo's voice came from behind her. "They were found on my land beside my stolen map." Orson's calm expression cracked for only a second. Anyone could have written those notes. "Then we will begin with what cannot be written today," Sabine said. "Lena Dawes' memory." Lena rose from the front bench. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. She described the original boundary stone and the 3 river lines carved into it. Jonah Creel presented copies of council payments that matched the amounts in Alden's notes. Maybelle testified that she saw Alden leaving Ivo's stable before dawn. Thomas told the room about the envelopes and Orson's warning not to enter the map room. With each witness, the mood shifted. People who had entered expecting entertainment began leaning forward. People who had laughed avoided Sabine's eyes. Harlan stood suddenly. "This is foolishness." A child's memory, an old woman's story, and papers found by the people making the accusation. Sabine faced him. "Then perhaps you can explain Ivo's treatment. His wound was minor. His wound was infected because it was closed without proper cleaning. His fever nearly killed him. You left no medicine strong enough to control it. The weather delayed my return. You never planned to return." Harlan looked toward Orson. It was a small movement, almost nothing, but everyone saw it. Sabine continued. "You signed the statement used to remove me from the clinic 6 years ago. You wrote that my delay might have caused Elian Pike's death. I have obtained the logging camp report from Fair Hollow. It records the time of injury and the time he reached me. His chest had been crushed for more than 4 hours. Why did your statement leave that out?" Harlan's lips parted, but no answer came. "Because Orson needed Alden loyal," Sabine said. "Alden needed someone to blame, and you needed the clinic. This is not separate from the spring. It is the same method. Find a frightened person, offer him a useful lie, then punish anyone who refuses to repeat it." The doors opened behind the crowd. County Magistrate Evelyn Shaw entered with 2 deputies, shaking snow from her dark cape. Sabine had sent copies of the evidence to her 3 days earlier through Thomas, who rode the south path before dawn. Orson stared as if the mountain itself had walked into the hall. "This is a village matter," he said. "Not after allegations of land fraud and attempted injury," Magistrate Shaw replied. "Continue, Mrs. Kells. I would like to hear Dr. Voss answer." Harlan sank slowly into his chair. His face had gone grey. Sabine placed Mara's letter before him. "Did Mara Mercer tell you she feared for her life?" Harlan looked at the page. His hands began to shake the way they had when he signed Sabine's wage agreement. "Answer her," the magistrate said. Yes, Harlan whispered. A sound moved through the hall like wind through dry leaves. Ivo's face became rigid, but he remained where he stood. What did you do? Sabine asked. I told Orson. And after she died? Harlan closed his eyes. I signed the report. Was the report true? Some of it. Was the place of her fall true? No. Ivo drew a sharp breath. Sabine felt the pain in it without turning. Harlan's words came faster. I did not hurt her. I swear I did not. Alden found me that night. He said Mara had fallen near the spring after a struggle. He said it was an accident. Orson told me that if the village learned what happened, the railroad deal would fail, and every family would suffer. They brought her to Eagle Cut before the search began. I signed what they gave me. Alden leaped to his feet. Liar! One deputy stepped between him and Harlan. Tell them about the saddle, Magistrate Shaw said. Harlan covered his face. Alden cut it. Orson said Mercer had found a mark near the spring. He only meant to frighten him away from the ridge. Then Mercer fell. They sent me to make sure the injury looked treated. The room erupted. Some people shouted. Others rose from their benches. Orson struck the table again and again, but his little hammer had lost its power. Sabine lifted her voice. Sit down, all of you. To her surprise, they listened. This hearing will not become a mob, she said. That is how innocent people are blamed and guilty people hide. The magistrate is here. The evidence will be examined. The law will decide what follows. Her words were meant for the room, but part of them were meant for the younger Sabine, who had once stood outside a locked clinic while grief became cruelty. She would not answer injustice by building another crowd. Magistrate Shaw ordered Orson, Alden, and Harlan held for formal questioning. Alden protested until a deputy found the brass survey marker in his coat. Orson remained silent. As he passed Sabine, he stopped. You think they will thank you, he said quietly. These people turned on you once. They will do it again. Sabine met his cold eyes. Perhaps, but I did not do this for thanks. The search for the old land grant began the next morning. Mara's clue led Sabine, Ivo, Magistrate Shaw, and 2 deputies to Mercy Spring. The trail was steep, but the sky was clear. Water emerged from a dark opening in the rock and poured over a stone shelf in a silver curtain. Behind it lay a narrow cave. Ivo went in first. Sabine followed, turning sideways through the opening as icy spray soaked her coat. At the back of the cave, above the place where the falling water never touched the ground, a small iron box rested in a crack. Inside was the original land grant, wrapped in oilcloth. The paper named 12 founding families as shared owners of the spring and the lower valley. 3 of those families still lived on their farms. 6 had been displaced by Orson's false fees and Alden's surveys. The remaining shares belonged to descendants who had never been told of their rights. Beneath the grant lay one final letter from Mara. Ivo read it beside the water. Her words did not accuse him of failing her. They asked him to live if she could not return. She wrote that love was not proved by following someone into darkness. It was proved by carrying light forward. Ivo lowered the paper. For a long time he could not speak. Sabine stood beside him, while the spring thundered around them. I spent 5 years thinking my grief was all I had left of her, he said at last. It was never all you had. No, he looked toward the bright water beyond the cave. She left truth. She left courage. Sabine touched his hand. And permission, he nodded. Tears moved down his face. But this time they did not break him. They seemed to release something that had been locked too long. The county trial took place in early spring. Orson Vale and Alden Pike were convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and causing Ivo's accident. The investigation into Mara's death found that Alden had confronted her at the spring and grabbed for the land grant. She fell during the struggle. Orson helped move the evidence and threatened Harlan into changing the report, though Harlan had accepted money and his fear did not excuse him. He lost his medical license and received a lesser sentence after giving full testimony. The North Crest Company withdrew its claim. The land taken through false surveys was returned to the Dorr, Creel, and Bell families, along with 3 others. Mercy Spring was placed in a trust managed by the families named in the original grant. No single official could ever sell it. Briar Glen changed slowly, as communities often do. There was no morning when every cruel person became gentle. Some villagers apologized because they were ashamed. Some apologized because the powerful men they had followed were gone. A few never apologized at all. Berta Pell came to Sabine one afternoon carrying a jar of apple preserves. She stood awkwardly outside Ivo's house and looked at the ground. "My boy would have died if not for you," Berta said. "Years ago, when he had the fever, I remembered that every time I laughed at you, I did it anyway." Sabine waited. "I am sorry," Berta whispered. Sabine accepted the jar but did not rush to ease the woman's discomfort. "I believe you are sorry today," she said. "What matters is what you do tomorrow." Berta nodded, tears bright in her eyes. It was not forgiveness, not yet. It was a door left unlocked. The village offered Sabine the clinic again. This time, the agreement named her chief nurse and gave her control of its daily work. She read every line before signing. Then she added one condition: no one would be denied care because of money, family name, past mistakes, or appearance. Ivo built shelves for medicines along one wall of the mountain house. Sabine told him the clinic belonged in the village, where people could reach it. He agreed, then pointed out that storms still trapped travelers above the tree line. By the end of summer, the empty rooms in his house held clean beds, blankets, and supplies. Shepherds began stopping there during sudden weather. Lost children knew they could follow the stone markers to a warm fire. Women escaping cruel homes found a place to sleep without questions. They called it Mara's Refuge. Sabine chose the name, and Ivo carved it into a pine board above the door. One evening, as the first autumn frost silvered the grass, Sabine stood beside the fence, watching lanterns climb the trail. For a moment, the lights stirred the old fear in her. Then she heard laughter. Tomas was leading 2 families up from the village for the refuge supper. The lanterns were not hiding now. They moved openly beneath the stars. Ivo came to stand beside her. His limp remained, especially in cold weather, but he no longer moved like a man expecting the earth to disappear beneath him. "There will be 12 people at supper," he said. 14. Lena invited the Bell girls. "We need another table." "You said this house was too large." "I was wrong." Sabine smiled. "You should say that again. I may never hear it twice." He took her hand. A new silver ring shone on her finger, simple and strong. They had married at Mercy Spring in June, with Lena, Tomas, and the returned families around them. Ivo had spoken his vows without hesitation. He did not call Sabine beautiful in spite of anything. He called her beautiful because every part of her belonged to the woman he loved. Her round face, her tired eyes, her capable hands, her laughter, her anger, and the generous body that had carried her through every storm. "Do you regret staying?" he asked. Sabine looked at the dark stone house, its windows warm with light. She looked down the slope toward Briar Glen, where the clinic chimney sent a thin line of smoke into the evening. Once, the village had made her feel too large for every room, and too unwanted for every home. Now people climbed the mountain because her door was open. "I regret that I believed them for so long," she said. "I thought I had to earn the right to take up space." Ivo lifted her hand to his lips. "And now I know space can become shelter." The supper lasted late into the night. Lena told stories about the first settlers. Tomas described his plan to study surveying and restore every old boundary marker. Berta served the apple preserves beside warm bread. No one spoke of Sabine as a burden. No one asked her to become quieter, smaller, or easier to overlook. After the guests left, Sabine found Ivo alone near Mara's portrait. He had added fresh mountain flowers beneath it. "She would have liked tonight," Sabine said. "Yes." He looked at the portrait, then at Sabine. "For a long time, I thought loving again would betray her. Grief makes strange rules. You broke most of them." "I have been called difficult." Ivo drew her into his arms. "You are. Sabine rested her cheek against his chest. His heart beat steadily beneath her ear. Outside, the wind crossed the high ridge and moved through the pines. But the sound no longer resembled a warning. It sounded like distance opening. Years later, travelers still told the story of the large woman in the green coat who walked into Briar Glen during the rain. Some said she had uncovered a fortune hidden in the mountain. Others said she had faced 3 powerful men without fear. Those versions were easier to tell than the whole truth. The truth was that Sabine had been afraid many times. She was afraid when the villagers laughed. She was afraid when Ivo's fever rose, when the lantern crossed the forbidden trail, when the warning appeared, and when she stood before the council with old shame pressing against her ribs. Courage had not arrived as a sudden flame. It had grown through small choices. She opened the door. She crossed the storm. She listened to grief. She copied the evidence. She asked frightened people to stand with her. Each choice became a light, and together, those lights revealed the path. The people of Briar Glen were forced to learn something too. Cruelty had made them easy to control. As long as they were willing to laugh at the person standing alone, powerful men could choose who stood alone next. When Sabine refused to accept their shame, she did more than clear her own name. She showed them the cost of every silence they had mistaken for safety. Mara's refuge grew. A second stone building became a schoolroom and winter pantry. The Spring Trust paid for bridges, medical supplies, and fair surveys. Ivo taught young guides how to read clouds and rock. Sabine trained 2 nurses and never allowed either of them to face a grieving family alone. On the anniversary of the public hearing, the village gathered beside Mercy Spring. 12 new boundary stones stood along the valley, each carved with 3 river lines. Lena Dorr, now leaning on Sabine's arm, placed the final stone near the water. Orson's old meeting hammer had been burned for kindling. Alden's false maps were kept in the county archive as evidence of what a careful lie could steal. Harlan, after serving his sentence, sent Sabine a letter. He did not ask forgiveness. He admitted that he had chosen comfort over truth twice, first with Elian and later with Mara. Sabine kept the letter in the clinic, not as a wound, but as a warning. That evening, she and Ivo climbed home beneath a clear sky. The trail that once carried secret lanterns was marked with safe posts and open lamps. Ivo walked slowly beside her, and neither hurried. At the final turn, the refuge appeared above them. Light poured from every window. A traveler had arrived early and started the fire. Someone was singing in the kitchen, badly but with confidence. Sabine stopped to catch her breath. Mountain air filled her lungs, cold and clean. Ivo waited without impatience. He had never once asked her to move faster than her own strong pace. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She looked back at the valley. Briar Glen was small from that height. The roads, rooftops, and council hall seemed almost gentle beneath the evening snow. She knew better than to believe a place could become perfect. People still failed one another. Fear still looked for easy targets. Grief still needed somewhere to go. But now there were witnesses, records, open doors, and people willing to speak. "I am thinking about the day I arrived," she said. "They saw my coat, my face, and the size of me. They decided I was too much trouble to carry." Ivo smiled. "They were right about one thing." Sabine raised a brow. "You were too much for their lies to carry." She laughed, and the sound traveled across the snow. Ivo kissed her beneath the first stars. Then they walked toward the waiting light, side by side, while the mountains stood around them, not as a prison, not as a grave, but as a home large enough for every part of them.